many people are feeling hopeless and insignificant in their lives. They feel powerless in a world that they feel they cannot control. The world seems so large and chaotic that it leaves no room for the individual to have a voice. The answer Jung gives to this situation is to develop an inner organization within oneself. In this video, I'm going to outline the inner process of order and synthesis that Carl Jung talks about. So you can undergo this process within yourself and to get into that state that Jung outlines as an inner state of inner organization. So I'm going to read out this quote by Jung. And this quote is in Volume 10, Civilization in Transition, in the book, The Undiscovered Self. So this is the quote from Jung. The suffocating power of the masses is paraded before our eyes, in one form or another every day in the newspapers, and the insignificance of the individual is rubbed into him so thoroughly that he loses all hope of making himself heard. So let's think about this quote for a little bit. We've got the suffocating power of the masses. We've got the world, its institutions, everything that's out there. And it seems as if the individual is now insignificant. The individual is powerless to make themselves heard. There's a lot of people in the world who are beginning to lose hope. They feel that they're insignificant in the face of the world. There's so much chaos going on around about us. There's so much complexity out there. But yet everything seems to be marching forward and there seems to be answers out there happening. But in yourself, you feel more disconnected from the world more than ever because your own individuality, your own sense of self is not being accounted for in the world's activity. So the world is marching along. Things are happening. People are talking. All these things are going on about you. But you are feeling hopeless in the face of this. You don't have a voice. You don't feel significant. There's governments. There's large corporations. There's communities everywhere. But where do you have your own place? Where can you be heard? Where can you feel significant? That is the question. That's what we want to answer. That is the problem we have. That's how we found ourselves. We found ourselves isolated in a world that's supposed to be all connected. We feel like we can't be heard. We don't have our voice represented somewhere. So let's move on through this and I'll read out this another quote from Jung. And he says, as experience unfortunately shows, the inner man remains unchanged, however much community he has. His environment cannot give him as a gift something which he can win for himself only with effort and suffering. On the contrary, a favorable environment merely strengthens the dangerous tendency to expect everything from outside. Even that metamorphosis which external reality cannot provide. So let's break that down a little bit. So Jung is saying right here that unfortunately that although someone may have community around about them on the external world, and he does before this passage talk about how community can provide a sense of meaning for someone's life. So community is not nothing. Community is important. But it's obvious when we analyze Jung's writing here that as it pertains to the inner world, the inner life of the individual, there obviously needs to be something different. Something different is required for the development of your inner life than merely being amongst community. That's what Jung is saying here. Because he says the inner man remains unchanged, however much community he has. So it doesn't matter if he's in a community. It doesn't matter where he's involved in church or he's involved in this organization, that organization, over here or over there. The inner aspect of the person remains unchanged in that situation. That community is not the agent of change for the inner development of personality as an individual. So, this is interesting, isn't it? So then he goes on and he says basically that the environment, his environment, cannot give him as a gift something which he can win for himself only with effort and suffering. So those things outside of you cannot actually give you the inner reward. The inner reward has to be something you go through. You expend effort for. You can't be given this. You can't obtain it from the outside. You can't be given it. It's the inner work you have to do in your own personality, in your real life, that you have to go through. And what's interesting about that is that this is talking about, say, a positive community. So let's say you're in a positive community. Even that cannot give you this inner gift that you must go through. Your own development comes through your own effort and suffering. No one else can give you this reward. It can't be gifted to you. It has to be earned. But what's interesting is that means if you're in a bad environment right now, then that should give you some hope. Because if you're in a bad environment, you can now confidently go, oh, well, the environment, even if it was good, was not going to actually develop my inner life. So now I feel even better. I can move away from that environment and find answers within. You see, you've looked outside around you and you can't find answers. Why? Because that's not where the answers are. Because the rational mind makes you think answers are outside. And, logically, I admit and say, of course, you can look at someone, you can observe what they've done, and you can learn from that and try to improve your life by copying someone else. But ultimately, that person is not you. Remember, what's the goal here? The goal is to become an individual. You can't actually become an individual in the uniqueness that you really are. The complete pattern of your individuality to the finest detail cannot be completely lived out by only following others. It's something you have to work out in your own life. Even if you followed someone else, you'd be applying what they've done in a different context, in a different time, in a different body, in a slightly different situation. So even if you do learn from others, it's still not really the same, because you're a different person and you're in a different situation. Even if the situation is similar, it is still technically different. So the answers in this sense of feeling overwhelmed, feeling hopeless, feeling insignificant are going to come from within. So, often you feel hopeless because of your outer situation. You look around you and you go, there is no real hope here. I don't know which way to go. In some weird sense, that is a good point to reflect on that, because now the answers aren't going to be outside. They're going to be within. So try not to feel too upset, because the answer you're looking for will actually come from within you. Now let's keep moving on here and move to this next quote from Jung, which is really the centerpiece of this whole video. It's why I decided to do this video, is this next quote from Jung. So here it is. Jung says, resistance to the organized mass can be effected only by the man who is as well organized in his individuality as the mass itself. Let me just read that one more time, because it's one short point that, I'm going to keep referring back to through the whole, the rest of this video, because really it holds a key to so much that will be unlocked, and it enables you to understand this process that Jung is talking about within you, and why I keep saying the answers are within you and not outside of you. And it's actually because they're intimately linked. The outer world and your inner world are linked at some level, and we'll get to that later, because that has to do with the instinct, that has to do with the conscious mind and how it corresponds with reality. But let's read this again so we really get it in our minds. Okay, so Jung says, resistance to the organized mass can be effected only by the man who is as well organized in his individuality as the mass itself. So the world, let's break that down a little bit. So the world is organized. Resistance to the organized mass. Okay, so that means the world is organized. For example, we call official institutional bodies organizations, don't we? Oh, this organization and that organization, they're doing this and that. And that organization is a collection of people who are organized to achieve some outcome or goal of whatever that organization has formed together to achieve and do. And we can see, later in Jung's work, he does refer to the organized state. So he is talking about institutions. The government is organized. They organize the affairs of society. They provide that framework of, the law and, making sure everything is done in accordance to the law and is, kind of economically sound and all this stuff. So they manage and organize society. They organize your life. That's basically what it's become in our modern world. You must say this, you cannot do this, you cannot do that. So they're organizing society. They're organizing your life. And same as a business. I mean, they're designed to extract profit, but they're an organized, formalized system to have you work in a particular way to get a particular outcome, to compete against other organizations so that they can achieve an outcome, to deliver a certain product or service so that they can profit from it. So the world, and even beyond these official structures, there's communities, collectives in general, people in general who form communities out there. It might not be a government, or it might not be a company, but there is an organization going on there, in the sense that when you have a collective of people, there's a social order. There's a particular social structure in these different communities or sub-communities. So there's a social organization. So even if it's not official, the mass group forms a particular structure. So therefore, the world consists of obviously formal and informal systems, but they are, groups of organized masses of people doing things. And the more you look through from their perspective, from their level, the individual's importance is reduced. The individual's voice means nothing. And especially not only your voice means nothing, or your actions hardly mean anything, your actual inner life, your inner dreams, hopes, desires, the development of your inner personality means absolutely nothing to them. It probably even means nothing in your own personal relationships to some people. You meet someone, you knew them for a little while, you share some inner experience you had, and they still reject it. So not only from... So this is how much your experience has been reduced in society. That's why you feel hopeless. You feel you don't have a voice. Because this this world is hyper organized, and they're organized for particular goals, and they've got everything moving in accordance to these goals out there. And then you're left behind struggling in your own self, not even understanding who you are, and you're like struggling in your own mind about what's going on. And then you look out and you're like, holy crap, look at all this. Look at everything that's going on. I don't know what to do in the face of all this. I'm hopeless, but all what I do know is I don't feel right, and I don't feel like I can express myself, or I don't feel like I have really any agency to do anything about this. So that's obviously a problem. So let's break this down a little bit more. Let's use this next quote from Jung. So Jung goes on and he says, all mass movements, as one might expect, slip with the greatest ease down an inclined plane made up of large numbers. Where the many are, there is security. What the many believe must, of course, be true. What the many want must be worth striving for, and necessary, and therefore good. Okay, let's break that down a bit. Obviously, he's being a little sarcastic there, right? So he's criticizing the idea of mass movements, right? And so he's saying that they all consist of large amount of numbers. And because of this, it forms this slope with, things slipping down. So it's not good, right? And so let's analyze some of these things he brought up, because it's very important. And ultimately, the goal here links back to the other quote that I'll want to bring back into view now, because we talked about the world being organized, but Jung said what was the solution to that? Only the man, he says, resistance, right, can only be affected by the man who is as well organized in his individuality as the mass itself. So what we're trying to achieve here is this inner organization within you. So you can resist these outer structures if you yourself are just as well organized within you. Now, I'm going to go through some of the basic things of being organized within you, but then Jung goes deeper into the depth psychology of it, which goes into your inner unconscious aspects of unifying and developing the personality at that level. So there's lots of different layers here, but I think it's important to still start at the top, because, the more organized you are within yourself and your own individuality, your own mind, you can resist outside negative influence, and you're not going to be, stuck or swept up because you're unconscious and you get swept up in these mass movements, and your thinking goes away, So let's analyze some of this here. Jung says, where there are many, there is security. So that's an important point to point out. Just that one point there is, most people are afraid. They're afraid to be an individual. They're afraid to step out and have their, neck stuck out, so everyone else can see them, basically. Everyone likes to conform and be in line. And there's lots of psychology on conformity. In social psychology, how people like to conform. They'll even conform to the point of giving you a logically wrong answer, even though they know it's wrong, but they prefer to be in line with others. And then if they do that long enough, they actually start doubting themselves and start to wonder if they actually did get it wrong. So social authority is something that can actually also make you illogical as well. But people do it because they have a sense for wanting to feel secure and safe. We all have a need to feel safe. It's a legitimate need, right? Because we're an organism that can be harmed, that can be hurt, and even psychologically and socially, we can be damaged. Our reputations, who we are, our ego can be bruised, but also in general, we want people to like us, right? That's a pretty normal thing. But this normal need of security kind of is raised to a level where the person can't seem to overcome just that need, right? So their need for security basically dampens and kills all hope of their need of being autonomous or being a real individual. So they don't really develop their individuality. They allow themselves to fill out and be shaped by those around them. And that's all they are. They're just an imprint of the world outside. Not to disparage them, to say that there is, I don't know. It's like I'm not trying to ridicule people where this has happened, because in some sense this has happened to all of us at some level. We've been socialized from the outside world, and so that's important, because it's a legitimate need that everyone has for security. And I don't want people to be arrogant, to think that, they're somehow better than someone who follows, the rest of society, because they're kind of in the counterculture. Like you're here right now discussing about how to think beyond that, how to break away from that. But it's important you don't become arrogant, because if you do, you're basically just being egotistical. The energy of that arrogance is more feeding into the egotistical ego. And then you'll think of yourself as being a counter-culture type person who is outside, who's developing, and you'll make a kind of a magnification of your own spirituality, let's say. And you'll then think that you're so good because of that. But really, it will be your spirituality is just a mask for your actual pridefulness. You see what I mean? But at the same time, so you have to be careful. At the same time, there is a genuine insight and greatness and power and authenticity and, a larger sense of self that does come from being more aware and breaking away from the herd, breaking away from having to have social approval to feel secure. So leaving security can be dangerous, and it does require someone who is strong, who is capable. So there is an authenticity to, undergoing this type of process, right? So there is a genuineness to being someone who is a kind of a stronger person. But at the same time, I just don't want you to get caught up into the idea that, it's all about the attitude, and the wisdom of what I'm trying to say has to be approached in a particular attitude. And that will help you, protect you from these traps along the way of this development process that we're exploring now. So let's move to the next point. We understand security is a general need. That's what traps a lot of people, right? So you have to be willing to risk things, and you have to be willing to, leave a sense of security in a wise way to become yourself and to resist being pulled down by everyone else. So the next thing is, he says, what the many believe must of course be true, right? And so that is so important to hone in on, just as we honed in on the security point. What the many believe must of course be true, right? It's sarcastic. It's obviously, the thing is this is so important for becoming organized within yourself, is when the world has particular ideas of what things are and what's true and what's not true, and what's acceptable, what's an acceptable position to hold and believe. But often the mass has things wrong. Just think in general, it's the easiest way to think of it, is most people, they're not scientists, right? So if they're speaking on some subject, they will just think such and such is some true thing, but they actually just don't even know the nuances and complexities. They're not even educated enough to know the nuances and complexities of some particular idea that they're talking about. So often it is the case that what masses purport to be true is actually in fact wrong. Sometimes the opposite is actually true. And That's really important, because if you want to be well organized within yourself, you're going to have to be someone who has in their own thinking the proper, you don't just defy what everyone else is thinking for no reason. That's what I meant about being egotistical. It's not being defiant for no reason. That's not the attitude, the right attitude to have. That's kind of an immature attitude to approach this with. It's more that you have thought through something seriously, and you've researched things, or you thought through something. You've actually created credible arguments, and you've thought to yourself, this is the truth here on this particular matter, and I think that is so important to actually do in your own life, because if you do have those arguments and you do have them within you, they're not going to be convincing to other people, because other people they're not often convinced by rationality. So they'll think you're irrational for just believing something that the social group doesn't believe in. But the reasons they believe in it is not because of any strong coherence of rationality they hold. It's just simply a deference to the fact that the social group espouses a particular belief or a particular thing or a way of doing something. But you will actually, in your own individuality, be able to see, arguments for and against, and, have evidence, or at least you have your own type of understanding, your own rationality that comes into why you came to a particular conclusion on something. So you're actually thinking about the underlying mechanisms. You're actually thinking about the underlying arguments, the underlying factors, whereas they're not thinking about anything. They're just thinking what the group thinks. And if you're out of line with that, then you're a problem. You don't know what you're talking about. So you have to be aware of that type of thinking. And when it comes to finding the truth, it's got nothing to do with what the group believes. And it's got everything to do with actually said truth and actually understanding the context around that to get to and to find that truth. So this can be throughout all, I'm speaking in general now, because there's so many different things out there that I could be talking about, but it's every domain of life, just any domain of life, from health to, money to, like people and how people operate, everything that you can think of. There's errors everywhere out there. So you have to be organized within yourself, right? And you can't know everything, but if you do in a certain domain, if you know something and you develop in yourself a kind of an organized position within yourself. So outside, you can't be persuaded. You can't be, they're ineffective towards you because you know the truth of some particular thing. So it doesn't matter what they're saying, because you've listened to them and it just doesn't even align with what's really going on. The reality is different to what the social group espouses. Okay, I think I've hammered that one to death. So, it's good. And I do try to practice this even more consciously. I think I'm naturally drawn to understanding things for myself, but even consciously, I think, okay, I need to learn about this a little bit more. I try to learn about something so I become more informed about stuff, and just really, integrating that into myself so that I'm like a fortress. So when I come up against other people and they go, oh, I didn't really think about it, but whatever, that's disorganized. I didn't really think about it. But when you think about something and you know about it, I'm organized. I'm organized in my thoughts on this particular issue. So it makes you stronger, right? But it's not really there to convince others. That's something I want to say. It doesn't matter how correct you are. It won't convince others. Even if you're superior at talking and arguing with them, you still won't be able to convince them, because that's not the mechanism for convincing people, evidently. For some people it is, who can think clearly, but for most people it's not. But it's more for you to be strong and organized within yourself. That's what it's for. Okay, next thing. So then we have security, must of course believe what you must be true. And then Jung says, what the many want must be worth striving for. Right? That's really interesting to hone down on too. So Now we're in the realm not of truth, not of the need for security, but we're on the realm of value. Because what the many must want, what the many want must be worth striving for. It's the idea of value. So the world values particular things, but your values, if you haven't watched the video before this, go and watch this video, maybe even after this. It's called Achieve True Autonomy, right? I made that video just before this video, and it's really about finding your values. So I deep dive there, so I won't deep dive as much here on it. But what the world will value particular things, and that doesn't mean you need to value it just because they say, oh, you should value this. Normally, their values are oriented towards what the group values. Why do you value it? You ask that, I don't know, it's just almost an assumption that they value it because everyone kind of values it. So they actually have adopted a group value, but not really a personal value that's developed from within them. So they don't even have an individualized type of value that they're espousing that others should hold. They're just trying to harmonize with what the group values. They've taken on that as their identity, as an overlay, but they haven't done any deep work to really connect that down into themselves. That's why even when they achieve and pursue the things that the world values, they still don't feel completely satisfied within themselves because they haven't done this deeper work that connects to your actual sense of being and inner development as a person. So what I'm saying is find your true values, follow that in your life. Don't worry about what other people value as far as worldly success. It doesn't mean that you ignore, the well-being of other people. I'm not saying that you just go out ignoring and harming people. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just saying that other people will value particular things. Usually it's something like, oh, you should be doing this, or you should be doing... It comes in these shoulds. You should be wealthy over here or pursuing that. And it's okay to do those things. Those things are actually good. If you challenge yourself and you try to do something and achieve something in your life, that's a good, positive thing. But to only, pursue money for the sake of it, or, I know people who say, oh, I want to marry a rich man. And I understand the utility of that. And in some sense, okay, let's say the man is rich, but he is also a good person. I mean, it's obviously better to have both, right? So, but it's the rational mind that it's the overvaluation of things that aren't really that important. If it's only about that, your life becomes a bit hollow. That's really what I'm trying to talk about. The pursuit of social aims that are hollow. You know what I mean? And it's more just about trying to look good than really something that really connects with you. So that's it. Okay, so let's move to the next thing. Okay, and therefore good. Even Jung's use of the word there at the very end, that what they're pursuing is actually good, is another story, because it might not be good. How the world is structured and what it's aiming at might not actually be good, right? And so there's a conflict now between your inner ideas and the world now, because now we've gone over all these basic things, and this just sits on the top. Jung keeps going down in this process, but we've got to start somewhere that seems relatable to our lives. So I think this is highly relatable, what I'm talking about here. So let's go to this next quote, where Jung says, all the thinking and looking after are done from the top. To all questions there is an answer, and for all needs the necessary provision is made. The infantile dream state of the mass man is so unrealistic that he never thinks to ask who is paying for this paradise. The balancing of accounts is left to a higher political or social authority, which welcomes the task, for its power is thereby increased, and the more power it has, the weaker and more helpless the individual becomes. So let's analyze this. And so obviously this ties back to the original idea that I was talking about feeling hopeless, weaker and hopeless, right? So Jung said that the weaker and more hopeless the individual becomes. So this is obviously, as you kind of hand over your responsibility for organizing and managing your own life, and these systems manage you and other people manage you, and these either political or social authorities manage your life, you begin to become hollow, right? Jung basically says all the thinking and looking after are done from the top. So you don't think through anything, like I said before, about getting your thoughts in order, getting what you actually believe in order, and thinking through it properly. And you're like, oh, okay, so I'm just like giving over my thinking to other people, right? And you're basically giving your life over to other people, not just your thinking. You're giving your entire life over. They're going to start managing what you do because you're not thinking for yourself and you're not looking after yourself, essentially, right? For all questions, there is an answer, right? So everything is made simplified. That's why anything that's kind of mainstream seems really simple and basic and almost boring. Have you ever noticed that? Whether it's music, whether it's anything that's kind of like adopted en masse is always really simplified and made to be some simple answer that anyone could grab onto. It's like, that's not good. Because really, you have to realize that there is a dissociation between yourself and this massive group, because your individuality is so intricate and it's its own thing that can't be accounted for in the equations of all these simple answers. So following just generic, simple life advice won't work for you. It might work for you to a certain degree, but only to the degree that it accidentally aligned with what your individual nature actually needed to live out and achieve, right? So the real thing is not these simple answers. The real thing is the answer that is demanded from your own unique structure. So, and that requires wisdom. That requires wisdom to understand how to listen to that, to find out yourself, to reflect on yourself, and to live out that is even harder, right? And so Jung says here, and all needs, the necessary provision is made. So money, in the world we have now, I'm a pretty compassionate person. I understand that the systems of the world can kind of leave people dispossessed. So I do believe in helping people, but at the same time, there has to be some balance where our lives aren't completely devoid of agency, and we're not able to actually take responsibility in our life to enact an inner structure that is able to bring order to life and create a great life out of ourselves. Think about like some type of love relationship. If both people didn't actually love each other out of their own genuine self, and didn't, their actions weren't actually motivated by their own sense of identity and love, but yet they were just completely mechanically controlled, and you found out, oh no, that's not real love. I was actually dating a cyborg that was completely programmed to mimic, how it loved me. You would fall over yourself, because you would realize that it was a falsity. It wasn't real. It was completely instrumental and mechanical, right? So anything that's completely controlled, even if it looks on the surface to have a particular outcome, it's not, for one, it probably wouldn't have the actual same outcome, because when you control something and everything is completely controlled from the top, it's not authentic. The real life and juice doesn't come out in that, and so, I think we need, so in other words, like this whole thing is, if it's basically that you are giving a part of your real self up, because you're like a sellout. Like if you think of someone who's sold out to the company, I'm a company man or whatever, that can have its benefits because it means you're loyal, you've got a sense of whatever in society. But the thing is like at another level, if all your provisions are made for you, and you're dependent on some type of institution, it then is giving you what provides for your life, right? And you're not going to bite the hand that feeds you. So it's going to shape you from the outside. It's going to start shaping who you are, instead of you receiving some benefit from some outside thing. But you're not just relying on that. You are kind of working and operating out of a sense of yourself, and, getting rewards like such as money and whatever is just a byproduct of your natural activity in life. That's, I think, is the more proper way of ordering and positioning yourself with the proper attitude to life. But when everything, in other words, you can buy people's life out, this is often what narcissists do too. They will and people with kind of like these different disorders, they will pay for things because you will trust them more. But you kind of, take a blind eye to the negative sides of this particular person, right? That they're trying to influence you because they're paying for everything and they're paying for certain things. So now you're kind of indebted to them. You become in debt. And it's more of a social, emotional debt, or it could be even a financial debt. But you feel bonded to them, and now you have a type of guilt. And that's how some people use money to control other people. So you have to be aware of that. And that's what happens with different institutions as well. You have to be aware of that influence on your mind. So it's a complex issue, like all these things are. And I'm not espousing a particular structure of how a government should be. I'm just saying be aware of how things are in their many formations and what their effect is. And, I think it is important to help people who are disenfranchised, like I said, but at the same time, it's also important to realize that people the highest aims of the human individual is not going to be given from the outside. It's something that they're given the right environment to thrive, so they're not deprived, but they're able to express out of their own sense of self greatness and build out of themselves great things. And, that's how true creativity comes. True creativity can't come from a mechanical process. It has to come from having enough autonomy to explore and find things that can be created out of oneself. And that's why creativity is linked to the highest forms of actualization. So you're not going to get those higher forms of actualization if you don't have true individuality. That's kind of hits on ideas from Nietzsche's work, which is like that he saw kind of society as raising up the herd, where it actually blocked the greatest individuals from rising up and providing great things. And in some sense, I do think that is what we have today in different ways. It could be argued in different ways depending on what circumstance we're talking about. But overall, there is this homogeny, I find, that we have. Anyway, so then Jung begins to talk about the infantile dream state of the mass man is so unrealistic that he never thinks to ask who is paying for this paradise. It's you. You're paying for this paradise with you sacrificing your sense of self and your life. The power has been siphoned off by whoever's in control at the time. And, Jung puts it interesting there, the infantile dream state. These institutions can prey on our proclivity to seek the safety of our parents and the dreamlike, childlike nature of living under the authority of our parents. So institutions like governments, even an organization, a business you work for, or, any social thing, a church even, any of these things can act, you can relate to them as if they're your parent. And then you then see them as the authority looking after you, and you're like a little baby. And then what that does is it produces an infantile state where you don't have to think, you don't have to take responsibility, you don't have to actually develop as a person and, live and wrestle with life yourself. You're just throwing and casting all your pains on these different leaders or these different institutions or whatever they are. It can even be a family, or even a partner you can even do this with. You can allow them to kind of look after things, and you're just this little baby attaching yourself along for the ride. Now, it's okay to share things and do different things, but I just mean there is kind of a problem there if you enter into a childlike state. And, Jung really talks about that, how that's not really a good state, because you start relating to the world as if you were still a child. And then that means you don't get to grow up and take on your true calling. So then Jung goes on and he says, the balancing of accounts is left to a higher political or social authority, which welcomes the task, for its power is thereby increased. And the more power it has, the weaker and more helpless the individual becomes. So we want to avoid that. But I want to just say what's interesting here is I don't have the direct quote, but in the Bible somewhere, it does say, which I always find is really powerful. And sometimes I just say it to myself. And I should look it up for you, but I don't want to take that time now on this video. But I've got it written down to say that in the Bible, it does say somewhere that greater is he who lives in me than he who is in the world. Actually, greater is he who lives in me than he who is in the world. Let's look it up. Okay, so I think it might be 1 John 4:4, something like that. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. But what matters is there is a sense of self. Yeah, I think it is. You, dear children, are from God and have overcome them, because the one who is in you is greater than the one who is in the world. That's the NIV. And then where's the King James? Ye are of God, little children, you have overcome them, because greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. So there is this kind of idea of this inner, going back to the original idea of this video, is there is this inner order. And we're going to be delving deeper. We've talked about the kind of surface level stuff. Now we're going to be talking more about the deeper aspects of Jung's process for this. And I'm sorry that it took me 47 minutes to get to this, but I think there's a lot to cover. What I have already covered so far, I think is really important to creating an inner order. But Jung's psychodynamic aspect of it goes deeper into the unconscious. And I see a correspondence between this quote and the Bible. Greater is he, where is it? Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. And there's something about that hints at what Jung's talking about getting in touch with the archetype of the self, which is the archetype of wholeness Jung talks about. And what's so interesting about that is that Jung is saying that is the organizing principle within you. And, and Christians and other believers of different faiths would say that is God. So essentially, God is the organizing principle within. And Jung actually talks about, in some other place, which I didn't pull out this quote, but I've quoted it in another video where I talk about, the deeper, Carl Jung's deeper meaning of introversion. In that video, I talk about Jung and how he talks about the different opposites of the self, which is the archetype of the self, and then the world on the other hand, and he actually contrasts them as opposites. So the self and world are opposites. So the archetype of the self encompasses the entirety of the psyche, including your conscious aspect, but also the entirety of the unconscious aspect. And so, in some sense, God and the world are opposites too. And you can see that through religious mythology too, that the idea is that God and the world are kind of have these different antithetical values to each other, right? And so that is really interesting, that the self is the opposite of the world in the sense that they... And in that sense, they're actually equal to each other. So in other words, Jung, I remember in this quote, and I don't have it specifically, but I remember the essence of it, is he was saying that the ego can't really face the world because you feel so puny and tiny in the face of the world, right? But the self, the greater aspect of your personality that you can connect to in the unconscious, is capable of standing against the world. So in that sense, they are equals, or they're meant for each other. They're opposing opposites, and they're kind of, in some sense, the self is the world from within. So you've got the world within and the world outside you. And so they are, equivalent to each other in the sense that they're tied in as kind of like equal capacities. The ego is so weak and small, but the self can actually provide a resistance against the outside factors. So the inner organizing principle is the archetype of the self, or is God within you. Depending on what you believe, but that's essentially what it is. And so, but just knowing that is kind of not enough, but that helps you get the big picture straight away. And then we can go through, kind of some of this stuff, that the actual process of what Jung talks about here. But quickly, before I want to go there, I do want to say that I think the practical result, before we delve into the more like Jung's quotes and everything, the practical result, I think, is that you live out your values, as I said in my other video, but that you also become a kind of creator. But you're not necessarily creator, but the self creates something through you, through the structure of your own personality. And you begin to live life not by the well-worn paths of other people or by society, but by this image that arises within you that enables you to be strong enough to live the life independently of social opinion or of, what the mass values. But out of doing that, you actually give something back to them and you transform them. So that's why I was tying creativity here and there to these things, because creativity means you're bringing something forth out of yourself that is new. And that actually is, a unit of value for the world. And you're transforming the world by doing that. But you're also allowing yourself to live on the platform and structure that you've built out, that comes out of yourself through the connection with the unconscious aspects of yourself. So obviously, I think that is an ideal state, because then you're not beholden by any necessity. Then you're not beholden by being a sellout or being paid or supported from some outside structure that doesn't have your best interests at hand. Because the world also is full of individuals that haven't developed, haven't gone under this development. So Jung's idea was not that you can resist this mass on the outside because you're just an individual on the outside, but that there's this, if you do the inner work, there will be a correspondence with that inner work that does have an effect on the outside. And so, and that's the real powerful thing here. So now that I've said it in those basic terms, let's delve into the more specifics of these quotes from Jung. So Jung says, resistance to the organized mass can be effected only by the man who is as well organized in his individuality as the mass itself. I fully realize that this proposition must sound well nigh unintelligible to the man of today. The helpful medieval view that man is a microcosm, a reflection of the great cosmos in miniature, has long since dropped away from him, although the very existence of his world-embracing and world-conditioning psyche might have taught him better. Not only is the image of the macrocosm imprinted upon his psychic nature, but he also creates this image for himself on an ever-widening scale. He bears this cosmic correspondence within him by virtue of his reflecting consciousness on the one hand, and on the other thanks to the hereditary archetypal nature of his instincts, which bind him to his environment. But his instincts not only attach him to the macrocosm, they also, in a sense, tear him apart because his desires pull him in different directions. In this way, he falls into continual conflicts with himself and only very rarely succeeds in giving his life an undivided goal, for which, as a rule, he must pay very dearly by repressing other sides of his nature. One often has to ask oneself whether this kind of single-mindedness is worth forcing at all, seeing that the natural state of the human psyche consists in a jostling together of its components and in their contradictory behavior, that is, in a certain degree of dissociation. The Buddhist name for this is attachment to the 10,000 things. Such a condition cries out for order and synthesis. Okay, so I feel like we've hit 55 minutes now. This is going to be hard to go through completely, but I might do another video, but I will try to hit the most, important points that I can for you right now. And that basically is this. In summing this up, there is a correspondence between your psychic nature and ultimate reality. And basically, Jung talks about it in this way, where he's referring to those ideas of the alchemists in medieval times, that the microcosm can impact the macrocosm and vice versa, and they're kind of connected. And so Jung's idea here is that when it goes down to the idea of the instincts or consciousness, he uses two things. He says, on the one side, there's consciousness. So your consciousness is a particular product of reality itself somehow, right? And it bears an imprint of the greater macro structure of things, that somehow there is a correspondence between them. Otherwise, it wouldn't really exist in the way or the pattern it does exist right now. Then we can also see it from another angle through the instincts. Your instincts are also particular patterns of nature that connect you to the macrocosm. And so those two insights I think are really interesting. But then really, when we get down to the personality side of it, he says, so what should we do? Basically, what he's saying is we're made up of these different psychic components. And he says, the human psyche consists in a jostling together of its components and in their contradictory behavior. So you'll be searching for one thing, searching for another thing. You'll have it. How many times have you tried to do something? You've wanted to do something with your ego, but yet you just couldn't really do it. Something popped up and you just I can't do this. And then, oh no, I got distracted over here, or I wanted to do this and I was doing it pretty well. And then, now I'm doing this. So I think that's all a part of our experience, and we can feel different drives we have. We might have a sexual drive over here and we're really thinking about that right now. And then all of a sudden that's kind of done. And then you're like, oh no, now I'm thinking over here. Now I'm hungry over here. And so I want intellectual stimulation over here. I'm learning about this. Oh no, I remember I have to attend to this over here. So there's different drives within ourselves that actually want different things. And it's hard to order our own house. And Jung actually goes into this and says, some people seem to be able to focus their whole life on one single thing and outcome. And they're obviously really successful people. But Jung actually questions that and says, is it really worth forcing this kind of single-mindedness? So actually his ideal state is not that single-mindedness, because that single-mindedness does bring a kind of order, but it's at the sacrifice of wholeness. You actually sacrifice and suppress other sides of yourself to focus on one side of yourself. You often see this with people who are hyper into work or hyper achievers. And they sacrifice their feelings for the sense of just, doing something, achieving something. And I think you can go through seasons or things like that. And everyone's different. Everyone has to live out their own particular way of being. But I think for Jung, what he's basically saying the ultimate state is to become whole. And that's not to have a single-mindedness, but also not to be left with this condition where we have this contradictory behavior. So in other words, the work of inner development and personality is to bring together or bring on side and become conscious of the different aspects of oneself, to bring on side every element, all these other personalities, to integrate them into each other so that they become congruent and start working together. So the different aspects of yourself are now working together. Instead of being one-sided and cutting them off and only paying attention to one aspect, you're being conscious of all the different opposing aspects and trying to get them to work together. And that's why Jung says such a condition cries out for order and synthesis. And I think it's important to have the order, but it's not just order, it's also order and synthesis. So, now I've hit an hour, and my goal was not to hit an hour, but evidently another part of my personality took me off onto a different route. But that's okay, because we're coming to the end part of this now. But this is the most crucial part where we get, I guess, into the more deeper, in some sense, esoteric sense. But it's also how Jung viewed the psychological function of the symbol within the unconscious and in the unconscious mind. And so I've talked about this actually in my other videos, if you want to look at them, where I had a really big moustache. And I compared Jung's model of the self, and I also compared Nietzsche's idea of the Übermensch. If you watch that video, I think in that one, or maybe another one, but I think it's that one, I talk about and compare their different models of the psyche, and it really gets into this idea of how they see the opposites of the psyche interplay. So, at first it to anyone getting into Jung, it can seem a bit odd and understand where do these ideas of this opposites within oneself that need to be synthesized come from. It can seem a bit confusing at first, I find. But essentially in any situation you're in that's a problem in your life, it's usually because it's framed, at least in your mind, as a problem, is you'll be identifying with one side of a problem, and then the outer situation will represent some other side of the problem. This is most easily understood if you're in an argument with someone. You're kind of seeing things one way and someone else is seeing things another way. You're in conflict. You're not reconciled, right? You have a particular standpoint and an idea of how you see life, and that other person has a particular standpoint and how they see life. And we both look at a situation and we see it differently and we're arguing about it. That's actually a good way to understand the situation of conflicting aspects of your own self within yourself. So different aspects of yourself will be in conflict in an argument, let's say, with the other aspect of yourself. And a really easy way to understand it is thinking and feeling. So you might be thinking a certain thing, but you'll be feeling another thing, and you'll be in conflict on your thoughts versus your feelings on something. And Jung, if you've watched my other video, The Dark Night of the Soul, which is my most popular video, thank you for watching, thank you for sharing and helping me out. Please keep helping me with these other smaller videos that don't get as much attention. But basically in that video, I do talk about the alchemical process of how thinking and feeling come together. And in alchemy, it's called the unio mentalis. And that's a state of mind where your thinking and feeling have become unified together. So what I'm talking about is bigger than all this. This is just an example of one reconciliation between one pair of opposites, right? But Jung talks about wholeness, this idea of why is it called the archetype of wholeness? Because you're actually integrating multiple pairs of opposites in your life. So now you've got your thinking and feeling combined together in the unio mentalis, but now there's another aspect of you that is in conflict, right? So let me talk about this a little bit more. So let me read this quote from Jung, because now we're down into talking about the symbol. So Jung says, just as the chaotic movements of the crowd, all ending in mutual frustration, are impelled in a definite direction by a dictatorial will, so the individual in his dissociated state needs a directing and ordering principle. Ego consciousness would like to let its own will play this role, but overlooks the existence of powerful unconscious factors which thwart its intentions. If it wants to reach the goal of synthesis, it must first get to know the nature of these factors. It must experience them, or else it must possess a numinous symbol that expresses them and leads to their synthesis. Okay, so that describes the psychodynamic process within the unconscious that leads to the inner order and synthesis that Jung said was the answer to resist the outward mass. Because now you are able to be just as organized in your own individuality as the world is, basically, right? And it's because you're connecting to a symbol. And so Jung sees this idea of the symbol as actually what synthesizes or unifies the two opposites within yourself. Now, so that's the theory, that's the idea. Now, I'll tell you an example, and I emphasized it just before with thinking and feeling, the idea of the unio mentalis, but I'll give you an example in my own actual life of how that happens. So basically, without just cutting to the chase quickly, is I actually had a dream about a woman who came out of the water, and a woman came out of the water, and I can't remember exactly off the top. I'd have to go back and read it, but she, I think, held my hand or something, like we were touching, and then she said to me, give me permission to go upstairs, and she said, and I'll change things. And she said, but the man rules up there and he won't like it. And then I said to her, okay, I'll give you permission. And so then there was like all this colorful stuff happening upstairs. And I think just in the background, the man was there. And basically it all transformed. And, there was obviously other details in the dream, but that's all the significant ones that really matter. The symbology of the woman from the water is obviously the unconscious, right? And it was my unconscious feelings coming up. And the man that rules upstairs is obviously the rational thinking side of my personality. And he's not going to like it because thinking doesn't like feeling. It's antithetical to it. But evidently, this dream formed a kind of symbol or a mythological motif. And I'll tell you, the effect of the dream, it wasn't just some dream and then it was nothing. It actually had an actual effect on the structure of my personality moving forward. I actually became less frustrated with things, less trying to strive for things out of just thinking through things and go, I have to do this because of this, right? Like forcing your way through your thoughts to do something. Instead, I was more in harmony with how I felt of things, but I could still think through things really well. And so I believe, to me, that was my understanding of the integration of the unio mentalis. And I believe I underwent that process. And you become way more self-aware of yourself through it because you have the combined understanding of your thinking and your feeling. You understand what's good for you and how to relate and harmonize with the world on the feeling side. But with your thinking, you can think through things and see rationally, what's true, what's not, and, what will work or how things work, right? And then you can use both of those things together, and now you live kind of a life in wisdom, So that's just one example. So in some sense, I don't know how to say that I induced that, but I guess I was reflecting on myself. The way to enter into these types of things is to pay attention to your dreams, to reflect on yourself and do introspection, to reflect on your feelings, to try to pay attention to your unconscious and what's there, and to listen and to have the two sides of yourself come up. And I was grateful enough to have them come up in a dream like that. Now, I'll give you another example because that's thinking and feeling, and I've shared that before, but I'll give you another example, and I think this one I'm still working through in my life, but it's becoming more clear. and it is the opposites. And I think a lot of people are struggling with this because I've noticed it in real life. And there's a lot of different teaching out there that makes it difficult to understand how to navigate through these things. And that's this. The struggle, or the synthesis between materiality and spirituality. Materiality and spirituality, or matter and spirit. And this is a difficult opposite to reconcile with. And in the Bible, you can see this opposite come up. And I've mentioned it before in that video on the deeper meaning of introversion, Carl Jung's deeper meaning of introversion. And that is that Jesus, as an archetypal kind of motif, talks about the opposites between God and money. And he says you cannot serve both God and mammon, right? But what's really interesting is, like, so in most traditional spiritual traditions, all sorts of religions, not just Christianity, but including Christianity, they call for kind of a negation or an asceticism, so a pulling away from life, a rejection of the world and materiality, right? And an overemphasis of spirituality. And so, but on the psychological level, so there's different levels you can think of this at. There's kind of the spiritual and religious level, but then there's the psychological level where I'm talking at. Evidently, we live in a world where you have to have and take responsibility for material things. And, in some sense, it can be seen childish, especially if you use it as a weak excuse. That you use your spirituality as a weak excuse for not taking up responsibility of the things in your material existence. So I actually had a dream again. This is what Jung's talking about, a symbol from the unconscious. What is a dream? A dream reveals certain contents that come up into consciousness from the unconscious, particular symbols or formations of mythological motifs that have a particular effect upon the structure of your inner personality. And so I had a dream, right, thinking of the opposites between materiality versus spirituality. I had a dream, and it was a preacher. And the preacher in the dream said to me, pray against anything that says that money is evil. And that was it. So just think about that. A preacher is telling me to pray against anything that says money is evil. Now, I've analyzed that and reflected on that. And I think that is the unification of materiality and spirituality. It's actually a warning so I don't go too far into the spirituality idea of things and completely neglect the demands of material life. Now, it's interesting because Jung, for example, said that he had his number one personality, his number two personality. And so one side of his personality was to deal with these everyday life things, right? But his other side was more, into the esoteric kind of side. And then also I had this idea and remembered, like, Plato says, like, something, I think it's Plato, and he basically says, like, the downfall of not, I'm paraphrasing, the downfall of not, governing in the world is that you let some inferior person govern over you. So in some sense, you don't want to negate your responsibility to govern materially, or because your responsibility to govern over the material side of life actually can be your service to the world, to help people. That can tap into that higher purpose of who you are. So in that sense, I now see in that dream, the idea of money is that it's not evil, but that it's not just that I'm going to just be focusing on money, because the idea was still to pray and to be kind of connecting into that. So it shows that you can use money for higher purposes, right? But it's also, there's a warning in the dream in some sense, because it also says, like, pray against anything that says, so, and this is obviously just for me, because I'm the one who had that dream. So there's a myriad of ways that different people can approach different things in their life. But obviously within me, there's this synthesis between the outer and inner world. And I believe that we all struggle with that a little bit. And So I think that dream is an expression of the unconscious in the form of these symbols that then allow you to live out an understanding of their order and synthesis of the different pulling drives within oneself. So now you become more whole because you've transcended that struggle between these two opposites and you've integrated them. And now you live out the wisdom that comes through the integration of both of them. You see? So now I can use, there's a trap in money if you only pursue it for its own sake, or, because if you're negatively attached to it in a way where you hurt others, or you're negating the truth of certain things just because you're a negative attachment for money or whatever. So there are negative ways to relate to money, but if you have the particular personality and the right formation of attitude, you can use money in a powerful way for higher purposes, for good. Money reveals to you the values you truly have and the personality you really have. So you better make sure that you are developed in a way to handle that money, And so in that sense, there's nothing wrong with pursuing those things, but that's not the highest thing you're pursuing. You're pursuing your actual purpose, or the meaning of your mission and vision, but without negating and without rejecting one side of it, which is the practicality of managing your material affairs to make sure that the things that you want to achieve can actually be done. But it's not just by the ego or an ego-driven inflation for power, but it's that desire is subjugated into the bigger mission that is kind of, in some sense, sanctified and purified by, the higher meaning of your life's purpose, and that's where you're connecting, I guess, to the will of God, let's say, or you're connecting to that organizing principle of the archetype of wholeness. And then so your life is living out, this more powerful order and part of that is about trusting also in this process. And that's where you get synchronicities and different things start lining up on the outer aspects of your life that correspond to this inner order and principle of your life. And your life is an idea that's slowly unfolding into all the different manifolds and expressions of what it is. And it's through all the different elements of yourself coming together and forming a synthesis and order. And ultimately, Jung's answer at the end here, which, because this video has gone on for so long, I might just drop this bomb and then we can basically explore it another time, is in the end, Jung basically says that how you get there is through an encounter with the archetype of wholeness, such as the self, right? And that this can foster a sense of inner order. And then that inner order basically gives you an individualized, stable standpoint within yourself. So you're living by the organizing principle within you. And, and it comes through having basically an inner experience. Once you experience the inner numinosity of these inner images, like I experienced it through my dreams to synthesize those opposites that I mentioned earlier. But there's other ways you can have these experiences too, not just through dreams. But you have to have these inner experiences, and those inner experiences, they are what is transformative. They are what actually transforms your psyche and your personality at the deepest structures of who you are. And that is what undergoes the synthesis within you. The actual experience is what synthesizes it together. And then, that actually helps you become more organized within yourself. So you actually have to get in touch with the inner experience. And that helps you to be, to orient yourself to the inner world so you're resilient and can withstand any pressure from the external world. Because you've basically found the truth within. You've found meaning and purpose within you that is so powerful and undeniable to you. You might not be able to convince anyone outside of you, but you have had particular experiences that have touched you at the deepest level of your psyche. And that is what hooks you into an organizing principle, because it gives you meaning and life, a sense of life. And nothing from the outside can actually give that to you. It can't give you that value. And it's so valuable that's what now becomes your organizing principle. It's not your ego. It's not just self-reflecting on your ego, although that's the first aspects. As you go deeper and deeper and deeper, you begin to get in touch with this inner alignment of these experiences. And these experiences start to transform your life, and you enter into different synchronicities in your life, and you feel like your life is living out a particular order and synthesis, and you become more whole because different aspects of who you are now integrated into your personality, and you now have a wider scope of who you are, and you're a broader, bigger sense of self. So you can withstand the pressures of the world that are coming down on you. Anyway, so yes, I hope you've enjoyed this one, and there's more to be said here at the end here. There's always more to be said, and there's always more to explore. So I hope you're enjoying this. I hope you will come along for the ride, and subscribe if you haven't. Share this if you think other people will like it, because honestly, people have told me how much different things like this have helped them. I believe true change doesn't come from the outside something. It comes when someone hears something, or when they reflect on themselves, when they do the actual work in themselves, and then they go, wow. And I think that things like what we're talking about now are at a sufficient depth to trigger someone at the deepest level to begin to reflect on themselves, so they undergo their own process of transformation. So I think it's valuable to share this type of stuff. So yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate you listening, and I'll see you in the next one.